The recent passing of Allan Moffat prompted me to bump this story up the queue. See, I've been thinking about doing this one for a little while now, because for me personally, this was the most famous scene in Australian motorsport history. This was, of course, the great 1-2 form finish by the Moffat Ford dealers Ickx Falcons at the 1977 Bathurst 1000. Like all great moments, it wasn't scripted or planned. It came about purely by circumstance. But what a thing it was.
Colin pulls alongside. I don't think it's a threat to victory. I think it's just to line up the cars. Down the straight they go. Car 1, car 2. An absolute demonstration of the crushing victory to Ford here and the Allan Moffat dealer team. For the last time, they come down in that magnificent view from the 7 helicopter, a scene we've never seen before, side by side. Colin marginally in front.
Now, as a kid born in the 1970s, I was too young to see Moffat at his peak, but I grew up in a household where Australian motorsport history books were everywhere, and so I always knew who he was. And the inside cover of Evan Green's World of Motorsport book has this epic photo of Moffat and Colin celebrating on the hood of Moffat's XB Falcon hardtop. I just thought this was such a tough looking car, such a cool photo, and it had a huge impact on me as a kid. And I knew about his achievements and the great cars that he raced. And because of that, he was one of my earliest childhood motor racing heroes. Now, Moffat won Bathurst 4 times, twice when it was a 500-mile race and twice when it was a 1,000-kilometre race. He also won the Australian Touring Car Championship 4 times, although he should have won it in 1971 as well. His last ATCC championship in 1983 was also the first for a Japanese manufacturer. He won the very first Australian Sports Sedan Championship, and he won the Australian Endurance Championship twice. And long before he moved to Australia, he became just the second and last person to win an SCCA Trans Am race outright with an under 2 litre car. And he brought a new level of professionalism and intensity to Aussie motorsport that made everyone raise their game. Now, Moffat twice won the ATCC and Bathurst in the same year, 1973 and 1977. But 1977 was the most impressive in terms of pure results and the legacy that he left. He'd been part of the Ford juggernaut from the late 1960s through to 1973 before the manufacturer withdrew from racing. He then soldiered on as an independent before Ford returned in 1976, and he promptly won that year's ATCC. It was actually racer and Ford dealer Bib Stillwell who prompted the company's return to racing. And then for 1977, the whole program was stepped up to another level. Now, the first major coup was to get Colin to switch camps from Holden to Ford. Now, Bond was the leading driver for the factory Holden dealer team, and in fact he was Moffat's closest rival in the 1976 ATCC. So the Moffat Ford dealers team would run 2 cars in 1977 for Moffat and Bond. And the second major coup was hiring American Carroll Smith to manage the operation. Smith had previously worked for Shelby American and was a whiz race car engineer with a huge amount of experience. Now, Australian touring car racing in the 1970s was run to a quite different format to that of today. In 1977 there were 11 races that made up the Australian Touring Car Championship, but the last 4 of them were endurance races that were run at Sandown, Adelaide Raceway, Surfers Paradise and Phillip Island. And these 4 races made up what was called the Australian Championship of Makes. And while they were endurance races, the longest was 400 kilometres, so they only required 1 driver per car. And then on top of that was the Bathurst 1000. This was a standalone event, and for most Aussie racing drivers, winning this one race was bigger than winning the entire Australian Touring Car Championship. Now, Aussie touring car racing back then was run to a set of regulations called Group C. It was overseen by the Confederation for Australian Motorsport, but was quite similar to FIA Group 2 regs. Each make and model had to be homologated in order to compete. For the Ford teams, they started the year with the XB Falcon GT hardtop, even though the facelifted XC model had been released in July of the previous year. The XC wasn't homologated for racing until July 1977, and their Holden rivals would be aboard the Tirana L34 for the first part of the season before the new Tirana A9X was homologated in time for the Hang 10 400 at Sandown in September. Anyway, there were a bunch of very fast Tirana teams to take on the Fords. These included Peter Brock in the Bill Patterson car, John Harvey aboard the Holden dealer team car, and Alan Grice in the Craven Mild car, plus a whole bunch of others. But the Fords handed out a good old-fashioned arse-whooping. Moffat won the first 5 races, while Bond finished second in 4 of them. Bond then won round 6, while Brock finally took Holden's first victory of the season in round 7 at Lakeside. Ford's domination prompted the Tirana A9X to be homologated in time for Sandown, and Brock gave the new model a win on debut. Sandown also saw the first appearance of the new facelifted XC Falcons, which were homologated as GS 500s, with Ford having dropped the GT. The XC 500 GS also sported several new upgrades for racing. But so fast was the Tirana A9X on debut that Ford released a second homologation package for the XC as of October 1st, just in time for Bathurst on October 2nd. And this included a similar rear-facing hood scoop as on the Tirana A9X. Now the next race after Sandown was the Bathurst 1000, which I'll get to shortly, but after that followed Adelaide and Surfers Paradise, both of which were won by Moffat. In the end, he won his 3rd ATCC championship, clocking up 104 points, and in fact, he didn't even attend the last race because he didn't need to. And Bond finished 2nd in the championship with 74 points. So the 2 factory Falcons finished 1st and 2nd in the 1977 ATCC. And that perfectly reflected the 1977 Bathurst 1000. Now, the pre-Bathurst prep work on the Falcons was immense. The biggest problem that they had was the 351 cube Cleveland V8, which produced 525 horsepower. But Ford didn't homologate the Falcon with roller rockers despite Moffat pushing for them. The motors could be a bit fragile, and they also had a problem with oil surge. But Peter Malloy built the motors for the team, and they held together for most of the races in 1977, including Bathurst. And despite Ford releasing the newly homologated package just in time for Bathurst, for whatever reason, the updates weren't allowed. The Fords actually arrived for Bathurst with all the updates fitted, including the hood scoops, but they were told to remove them. But in the end, it didn't matter a bit. Anyway, come qualifying, and Brock stuck his A9X on pole. Bond was next, but a full second slower than Brock. Moffat was 3rd, and Grice was 4th. And at the start, Brock got the jump, and Grice leapt to 2nd.
And Grice is out for the lead. Brock's in front. Look how much ground Alan Grice has made up on him.
And at the end of the first lap, Grice was leading, with Brock 2nd.
Hatchback leads from the pole sitter, Peter Brock, then further back to Colin Bond. Well, and Allan Moffat now moving up into 3rd. Bond drops back to 4th. The 2 Marlborough Holden dealer team cars followed.
But from there, the 2 big factory Fords went to work. Moffat and Bond first went by Brock, and then they hunted down Grice. And then they just took control. Carroll Smith's game plan was, make the bastards chase us. And that's exactly what they did. And one by one the Tiranas struck trouble, while the big Fords just kept on marching on.
And you'll notice both of them are about ready to attack Alan Grice here on the outside, halfway down Conrod Straight. Moffat pulls out, takes him on the outside, and we'll wait and see whether Grice will try and race him into the braking area.
He'll take Bond with him though, Mike, and Bond is moving into 2nd place, and that'll drive the Ford fans crazy with excitement.
Here they come, but Grice is going to fight back on the inside of Colin Bond. Bond continues on, he's going very hard down the outside. Some team tactics here from Moffat and Colin Bond, effectively letting Bond through for the lead, and that was a very good manoeuvre. Bond will now lead, and the fans down here in Pit Straight are going to go wild with enthusiasm.
Now, Bathurst was the only race in 1977 where 2 drivers were required for each car. Moffat teamed up with Jacky Ickx in the number 1 car, while Alan Hamilton joined Bond in the number 2 car. And in fact, 1977 was the first year where cross-entering was allowed. Moffat actually wanted to share the number 1 car with Bond, but Ford wouldn't allow it. So Moffat suggested that Bond cross-entered into the number 1 car, so at least if that car won, he'd be classified as a winner. But for whatever reason, Bond chose not to do that. Anyway, Jacky Ickx was used to driving lightweight Formula 1 and prototype sports cars, and during his stint, he completely used up the brakes on the number 1 Falcon. So when Moffat went to jump in the car for his final stint, there were no brakes left. In fact, the pads were so badly worn, it was metal on metal. The pistons moved so far out that the brake fluid all came out, and that's what the smoke was in the final stages of the race. But by now, the only other car on the same lap as Moffat was Bond. The third place car of Peter Jensen and Larry Perkins was a full lap down. And so the main drama for Moffat was really whether or not he would actually finish the race. He slowed right down and Bond caught him. But as he was catching, Carroll Smith held out a sign to Bond that said, "Form finish, 1-2." And that's how they rolled around the final laps. And down Conrod Straight for the very last time, Bond pulled up alongside and produced those famous images. And so it wasn't that the team got together before the race and decided that they'd destroy everyone and then just cruise around in formation. It happened because Moffat's car was broken and Bond was instructed not to pass. But what a spectacle it made. So there you have it. I was too young to have watched the Bathurst 1000 in 1977, but my childhood memories are of seeing that famous scene being replayed over and over every year come Bathurst time. And for me personally, that is the greatest moment in Bathurst history. It just sums up the drama of that race and the emotion that goes with it. And while Allan Moffat achieved so many great things in his career, for me, that was the pinnacle. That is my everlasting memory of one of my earliest racing heroes. But I'd love to hear from you guys. What is your greatest Allan Moffat memory? Post in the comments down below. Anyway, that's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, please hit the like button and the subscribe button and tap that little bell thingy down below so you get a notification when I post up a new vid. Anyway, until next time, we'll catch you then. See ya. Bye-bye.